Hello everybody. Thank you firstly to ESIC for inviting me to be keynote speaker today. My name is Jelena Sofronijevic. I'm a radio producer, journalist and fourth-year history and politics student at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm specifically the producer of the 6-part podcast documentary series INDIAscussion, which launched on Apple Podcasts and Spotify in February 2020. So INDIAscussion follows the textile supply chain through Gujarat and Maharashtra in India across to China. All of the ideas and debates are presented in discussion with local farmers and artisans to businesses, fashion influencers and international design houses. And the series aims to unpack these complex issues related to environmental, cultural and economic sustainability, such as environmental degradation, artisan craft and gender, and corporate social responsibility. I'm going to very briefly run you through the process of my making the podcast, and we can talk about it a little bit in more depth in the Q&A if anyone is interested. But in February 2019, I took part in the Focus India trek to Gujarat and Maharashtra in India. And this was a trip that was run by the university. It's an interdisciplinary trip. It's available for third-year students. It's not currently running at the moment, but anyone could apply when I took part in it. So following the textile supply chain, I engaged in these very detailed personal discussions with local farmers and artisans and all of these people across the textile supply chain. And in particular, I explored the threats exposed and posed by the textile industry to environmental, economic and cultural sustainability, and challenges that all of these actors face in establishing more sustainable practices. Now, very disappointingly, I found corporate and political responses to this very urgent issue to often be very weak. And similarly, my engagements with fashion industry elites, those with very powerful platforms to influence consumer behaviour, often exposed further restrictions upon promoting sustainability in the textile industry. So as I said, during my time in India, I considered these issues from a very in-depth local perspective, which then encouraged me to look further afield. So in July 2019, I attended a summer school in Suzhou, China, which was focused more on corporate and political approaches to sustainability, so kind of looking at this issue from the top down instead. And I had interviews with local businesses, young international entrepreneurs, and even some more random interviews that are in that section as well. So there's a special episode of the podcast that is entirely devoted to exploring these issues in the Chinese context and how they're connected to problems in the textile industry in India. So as I mentioned earlier, I believe that an interdisciplinary and intercultural approach is really essential to rethinking sustainability in the textile industry. Sustainability itself is such a complex and contested subject, and I don't think that there's any single discipline, whether that's political, economical or sociological, that fully encapsulates this problem. And similarly, I don't think that sustainability-related problems can be solved at a local, national or transnational level alone. And I realise that using words like interdisciplinary and intercultural can often seem a little bit like they're buzzwords, so I'm going to try and unpack that a little bit more for you with respect to the podcast and what I've tried to do. So there's sort of 4 key aims in the podcast and things I want to tackle. The first idea is this idea that sustainability and the debate around sustainability is often reduced to mere environmental friendliness or being eco-friendly. And I think that this actually really ignores the numerous dimensions of sustainability in the modern context. So I'm going to draw on examples from different episodes throughout this, and here's just an overview of the 6 episodes before I carry on, to try and give you some examples to elucidate these different approaches. So with respect to against environmental friendliness, I want to draw upon the example of local empowerment through artisan craft and talk a bit about cultural sustainability. So while I was in India, I met a very amazing fashion designer called Anita Dongre, and we went to her fashion house in Mumbai. It's an international fashion house they display all across the world. And one of her initiatives is called Grassroot. And through this Grassroot initiative, she has employed 200 skilled female artisans and has also provided training to 200 unskilled female artisans in villages across India. And after a market quality check, the works of these female artisans are then sold under her global Desi brand, as it's called. Now, this is a fantastic initiative in many respects. It contributes to the cultural revival of dyeing crafts. It against the global mass market and against mechanisation, because most of these crafts are practiced in and for the community. And by linking them up to international markets in this way, you're really helping to preserve these crafts, and that's what I mean by cultural sustainability. And also, it's an amazing means of local and rural empowerment, because you're providing employment, skills, and opportunities to women in their communities without them having to leave, without them having to go and live in already overcrowded cities. And through this economic emancipation, lots of women also then achieve social emancipation. So because they're bringing in money to the homes, they receive more respect, they're able to send their children back to schools, they have agency, and they're listened to in the community more. These are all things that have happened as a result of these kind of initiatives. So on that front, that's a real way in which we can tackle cultural sustainability and how a project like Grassroot is really encouraging. However, at the same time, it's important to notice that these liberational cycles can also be very trapping. So the thing about artisanship and the community is that they're very closely tied. For the rural artisan, their home is their workplace, their community are their colleagues. And that's something quite different, obviously, to how we consider work often here. As a result of that, the division of labour is often determined by very functional, socialised roles. So women practice embroidery in the home because embroidery can be easily put down if they need to go and tend to their children, or perhaps they need to do housework. And it's important to note at this point that 80% of the garment workers in the textile industry are women, and our global textile industry is propped up by women who are working from home, which is something that we don't necessarily always think about when we think about fashion in this kind of way. And the problem that kept coming to the forefront of our minds is, do these women have a choice? If yes, okay, it's great to provide them employment in the home so they don't have to leave, and it's fantastic that we're extending these economic opportunities to rural villages and to areas that wouldn't necessarily have them, but at the same time, do women have that agency and that choice if they wanted to leave? Could they? So that's an interesting dynamic that's posed with respect to cultural sustainability. And we noticed that we kind of ran into so many debates over cultural and contextual differences over this, and whether we were imposing our own standards and our own desires for employment onto other communities. But as I said, that whole concept of agency and choice is really, really central. And there are so many ways that these initiatives like Grassroot do try to avoid imposing repressive power hierarchies. For instance, there's a big focus on capacity building. Like I said, there's a lot of women who are trained, who formerly did not have the skills of embroidery or things like that, and these projects can help to train them. And it's also important to try and promote creative independence. So instead of saying, you need to create this textile in this pattern, in this colour, instead of doing that, lots of initiatives instead choose to just buy the fabrics that the women are creating, giving them complete creative autonomy over the patterns that they're making. So that's one example of how sustainability definitely extends beyond the issue of environmental friendliness or even environmental sustainability when it's simply considered, looking at perhaps cultural elements of it. Secondly then, against the tendency to reduce this debate to fast fashion. I can't stand the phrase fast fashion, and for someone who's made a whole podcast series about sustainable fashion, that might be a bit of a shock to some of you. But my problem with fast fashion is that it entirely focuses these issues at the consumer end of the value chain, and it doesn't consider how we as consumers are connected to everyone else in the textile industry through our actions. So an example from the episode on cotton production does quite well to illuminate this point. I'm going to give us a bit of a historical perspective. I did say I am a history student. But if we look at the colonial legacies of the textile industry, more questions about sustainability crop up in that vein. So if you look at late British colonialism, it forced the Indian textile industry in the 19th century into virtual collapse. So this influx of cheaper machine-made yarn from northern England and tariffs on Indian imports all in the 19th century really did cause the Indian textile industry domestically to struggle. So between 1800 and 1860, Indian textile exports dropped by 98%. Their export industry dropped by 98%. And that caused widespread famine. Between 1.5 and 1.7 million Indian weavers died during that period as a result of that. Many were forced to move into agriculture and subsistence farming, and by the time Indian independence was declared in 1947, 90% of the national workforce was then employed in agriculture, many of those with historic family connections to weaving. Now, through that example, I want to illuminate how changing international markets can completely impact domestic industries. And we talk about cotton now. Cotton is the world's most widely used natural fibre. 350 million people worldwide depend on cotton production for their income. I'll come on and talk a little bit more about this later, but now you can see how the issue of sustainability isn't just about divesting from cotton as an industry, because we do have a social responsibility to people all across the value chain. So then that is the question, I suppose, how can you divest from a very environmentally unsustainable industry in a way that is culturally, economically and socially responsible? It's really important that we recognise our historic and formative impact on the Indian textile industry. And I think that recognising our impact is really the key to recognising our responsibility towards these people, these processes and the environment in these places that are thousands of miles away from us, and yet we are still so connected. And as I said, it's about reconciling these different responsibilities that we have. Yes, of course, we have a responsibility to be environmentally friendly and environmentally sustainable, whether that's buying local fibres or natural fibres, but we also have a social responsibility to be sustainable in our choices, and that means being responsible and responsive to the people who are affected by them. I think the typical example that is used in this is to do with factory working conditions. And I'm sure many of you will be aware of the 2013 Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh. And that did so much to raise our attention towards, or to raise popular attention, I should say, towards poor factory working conditions, low wages. And it was interesting when I was in India and visiting these, not necessarily fabric production mills, I visited cotton production mills, which is slightly different earlier on in the chain. But we went in with all of these expectations about what these factories would be like. And to a great extent, many of those were true. The air was thick with cotton fibres, it was very hard in that way. But it was mainly because the factories couldn't afford to keep all of these people employed. So again, it's another trade-off. How do you balance keeping a vast proportion of your workforce employed, because now those people don't have jobs and don't have an income, with obviously this demand for high quality and high paid employment? Another example of how it's not just as easy as saying it's all on our end and we can easily divest by buying local or doing this. So that's my kind of issue with fast fashion. I think another problem with the debate then, and our consideration of sustainability generally, is that there is a real disconnect between often non-Western producers and us as often primarily Western consumers. And I think a way that we can tackle that is really by educating people about garment production processes and platforming all the voices of the people involved in the textile value chain. So for instance, INDIAscussion really focuses on this issue of platforming. I really wanted to give voice and a space in our discourse for these often marginalised Indian and Chinese voices in the textile value chain. So in the podcast, it's basically a collection of interviews, and you hear people describing the problems they face in their own words. So you'll hear, when you listen, Gujarat farmers and cotton factory employees talking about the environmental and economic risks of using genetically modified or BT cottons. You'll also hear from artisan communities in Kutch, such as the Kalmyar hand spinners or the Bujodi weavers and dyers, the Aljarak block printers, and they will discuss the problems of cultural sustainability and their perspectives on the role of women, the role of communities, so giving voice to those communities too. You'll also hear from social enterprises who are working with new fibres, including hemp. There was a really fantastic social enterprise that we worked with called the HECO, the Bombay Hemp Company. And they speak a lot about the sort of high business element and how these local social enterprises are connected to the wider value chain. And then, as I mentioned, you'll also hear from high fashion industry figures such as Indu Dongre, the global fashion designer, also Renuka Joshi Modi, who's the managing director of Vogue India, and they will speak about the sort of media perspective and the high fashion perspective on these problems. Now, I mentioned that in India I explore these issues from a predominantly local perspective, and often it came across that these social enterprises and these business owners emphasized China's business practices, sometimes as a model to aspire towards, and sometimes as a threat and a competitor. And that was a real motivation for me, wanting to go to China and speak to these people myself. So, for instance, the managing director of an international furnishings company, which is Hangzhou Mona's textiles in Sofronijevic, she outlines these tensions between Chinese businesses and the Chinese government's recent environmental legislation. You'll hear from Chinese silk factory employees who discuss the ethical dilemmas surrounding the manufacturing and use of silk. You'll also hear from young entrepreneurs and local scientists who explore the problem of textile dye and water contamination. So I think that in platforming all of these voices, it's a really good way of, I suppose, emphasising how many people are involved in the textile value chain and how many players all across the world are connected to each other. And finally, I suppose my last sort of aim with the podcast was to tackle that absolutism that dominates debates and narratives around sustainability. I really think that elites in the textile industry seem to suggest that there's one very simple way to be sustainable, and if you don't adhere to that, you're a failure. So that might be something like buy local cotton, or choose organic cotton, or even just phrases like be vegan. They're very absolute in their intentions. And I think that's problematic in two respects. Firstly, as we've kind of discussed, it's false. There's no such thing as perfect sustainability because we have no definition of sustainability. And as I've mentioned, it has all of these different environmental, economic, and cultural elements. So for instance, there's no single fibre or fabric that is the most sustainable. There is always a trade-off. Cotton is one of the hardest raw materials there is to sustainably cultivate. As I mentioned earlier with genetically modified BT cottons, there are long-term issues with respect to those. Yes, they are fantastic in the sense that they're allowing farmers to mass produce and meet consumer demand, and often the fibres are much faster to grow. But they're leading to great water and pesticide overuse, which is ultimately depleting the soil in the long term, and soon most of these lands will be barren and unable to use for anyone. There are also economic problems associated with using these kind of seeds because they lock farmers into very dependent relationships with international seed corporations like Monsanto, because regular seeds will no longer grow in that soil. And I think also words like organic, ethical and fair trade, they're all used interchangeably and no one really knows what they mean. And that's because there is no set standard really for any of those words. Even BCI certified cotton, which is the Better Cotton Initiative, it's supposedly sustainable, but it's not necessarily certified fair trade, it's not necessarily organic, and it doesn't guarantee that child labour isn't employed in its production. So when you think about that, we have no definition of what sustainable cotton really is. And that kind of goes to show that there is no such thing as perfect sustainability or being sustainable, because what is sustainability? And in fact, it was interesting listening to the waste management panel earlier, because synthetic polyester, though we think about obviously as very problematic and in many respects it is also, when you think about it, the only fabric that's capable of being fully recycled. So in our current system, where we are more dependent on recycling than we are on having an actual circular economy, does that mean that polyester is perhaps more sustainable than cotton? Again, just something to think about with respect to this absolute idea that we have to buy organic cotton, whatever organic cotton means, in order to be sustainable. Secondly, I think that this absolutism is really problematic because I think ultimately it discourages individuals from doing anything at all. I think we should encourage all measures towards more rather than perfect or absolute sustainability. And there's a wonderful phrase in the podcast, someone who was on the trip mentions that we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I believe in that entirely. I think our approach to sustainability generally should be about cutting down rather than cutting out, and that's how we incorporate more people in the movement overall. That's not to say that we don't need drastic, large-scale change fast, and I will come on to talk about that. But in terms of individual responsibility and how we play a role in that, we shouldn't put others off by straying towards these absolutes. I think it's actually very damaging. And it kind of ties in with that idea that there is no such thing as perfect sustainability, because something that is more sustainable in the eyes of one person will be less sustainable in the eyes of another. I'll give you one example that cropped up quite a few times on the trip. So some, including myself, might believe that it's more sustainable to wear leather shoes rather than plastic shoes or vegan leather shoes. The reason I believe that is because, in my experience, leather shoes last much longer, so I'm sending fewer shoes to landfill if I choose to wear leather. On the other hand, there are people who will say that they think plastic-derived shoes are more sustainable because they're not reliant on an animal product. I think the key thing to highlight here is that you'll run into contradictions and you can have these arguments and debates until the cows come home. But as long as you are able to justify your position within that, I think that's more important than tending towards these very monolithic absolutes in the debate. As such then, INDIAscussion hopes to present a plurality of often competing perspectives in discussion with each other. Rather than telling you as the consumer how to be sustainable, what to buy or what to wear, INDIAscussion demands that you listen to these different perspectives and you decide for yourself the best way to be sustainable respective to your position. And I think that kind of ties into this whole wider question of who bears the responsibility for sustainability. And this is something we talk about a lot in the 5th episode on trade and business. Obviously, as I've mentioned, there are so many players across the textile value chain. And when you think about this question, who bears responsibility? Is it the farmers? Is it big or small businesses? Is it not-for-profits, governments, the media, consumers? And where? Is it in India, in China, or is it all across the world? I think the key thing to highlight here is that all of these actors face barriers to better practice. There's limits to scale, speed, cooperation, traceability across the textile supply chain, and these presumed tensions between commercial and sustainability interests. But really, when we recognise that all of these different stakeholders are connected and implicated by each other's decisions and actions and inactions, that's where we see we can implement change, or where we see change as being hampered. So for instance, rising consumer demand combined with government latency has left many farmers reliant on less sustainable but high-yielding genetically modified cotton because they need to produce more in order to meet demand. And I think that kind of emphasises that large-scale, high-impact action demands total cooperation across the textile value chain between these actors for the benefit of the system as a whole rather than for the benefit of any single interest. So it's about promoting absolute rather than relative gains in the industry. And I think a good example to talk about that is we can talk about waste management and about the move from a linear to a circular economy. So as we mentioned earlier, textiles are the second most polluting industry. We've obviously talked about fast fashion and how we throw away many clothes, but also textiles account for 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions and 20% of global wastewater. That's both during production, because often toxic synthetic chemical dyes are used, but it's also during the lifespan of a garment. So during one washing machine cycle, you can leach as many as 1 million plastic microfibers into the waterways. So again, thinking about this and unpacking it throughout. We also have the problem of transport, outsourcing and shipping, and the pollution caused by that contributes to pollution in the textile industry. And when you think about all of those things together, you realise how many different stakeholders across the world are all connected and implicated by each other's actions. So talking about linear versus circular economies, that's a term that was brought up earlier today, but recycling isn't part of the circular economy. Recycling is very much part of the linear economy because the product is still being degraded with each use. If you say, oh, I have a t-shirt and I'm going to recycle it by turning it into a rag to clean my car with, or something like that, you're still degrading the value of the product. And that's just not sustainable when you consider the fact that by 2050 we're going to be at 400% resource overuse, which means by 2050 we're going to need 400 times the amount of resources that we currently have for planet's worth, which is obviously impractical and unsustainable. So when you think about how we can transition really to a fully circular economy where these resources are looped at their highest value by some profits, they have to choose the better rather than the faster or the cheaper solution, and they have to make these garments more accessible and affordable to a wide range of consumers. But importantly, as I mentioned earlier, these commercial and environmental interests don't necessarily have to conflict, and I think another problem with the debate is that we frame them as though they do. Actually, it's much better for companies if they can maximise their material use, minimise waste, and perhaps stimulate job creation in innovation. Similarly, governments have to introduce legislation, but they also have to monitor brands and make sure that they're following up on these pledges. And they also have a key role to play in terms of educating the population, reconnecting us as consumers with all of these traditional processes, things like mending, which is not taught in schools anymore, and we won't be able to mend our clothes if we don't know how to do that and we're not learning it in the home. Similarly, I think the media has a big responsibility to use the income it gains from advertising less sustainable brands to platform sustainable brands and to platform these practices. That was really interesting, actually. A lot of people were very quick to attack Vogue India when we met with Manuka Joshi Modi for platforming brands, whether they were high street or designer, who have engaged in very unsustainable practices. I think if I say Burberry, then a lot of people in the room will know the kind of practices that I'm talking about. But then Manuka Joshi Modi sort of came back to us and said, yes, we do platform these brands, but without the money that we get from advertising them, we wouldn't be able to run our editorials about more sustainable brands. We wouldn't be able to platform the other practices that we do. I think there's, again, certainly a trade-off and there's nuance that is demanded in that argument, but it's an important point about how you might be able to use a current unsustainable practice in order to make changes for the future. And for us as consumers, we obviously have a great responsibility, as I've emphasised throughout. And I think the main thing that we can do is just be more discerning against the practice of greenwashing. And for those of you who don't know what greenwashing is, when companies and brands say that they're being sustainable. We can really scrutinise those influencers and brands who claim to be circular or sustainable. We can check the certification and check what that certification means. And because especially things like fabric conscious lines, if you think about better lines like H&M conscious, they actually get away with using very low percentages of these so-called sustainable fibres because there is no definition of what a sustainable fabric is. So instead of just going to H&M and picking up something from the conscious line, actually look at the label and see what fibres have been used, where have they come from. Just be more discerning in your choices. And obviously, buy less and wear those things more. 25% of our wardrobes in the West are never worn. And we own 5 times as many clothes as our grandparents do, and that figure will be 10 times by 2025. And this is an issue I point out the West because it's significantly more acute here. The average annual clothing disposal per American is 28 kilograms per year. Per Indian, it's 1.5 kilograms. So we just have a completely different mindset when it comes to owning clothes, not sharing. Implementing these kind of elements in our practices is really, really important. We obviously can choose more transparent and sustainable brands, but also I think something that's again important is to make sure that you don't just throw away all of your clothes and start again with a whole new sustainable wardrobe. Maintain and upcycle everything that you currently have. Buy second-hand and use these rental platforms that are available to you. With that in mind then, INDIAscussion is all about unpacking this very complex issue of sustainability. It's about pluralizing perspectives and making you think more deeply about these issues, your actions and your responsibilities. I strongly urge you to check out the Focused India project online. This was the group that I went on a trip to India with in February 2019. And I also hope that if you're interested, you'll join me in this afternoon's workshop where we'll be discussing these issues in a bit more depth. Thank you very much for your time for listening to me, and also if you have any questions, now's a great time to ask them. Thank you.
I know you mentioned that we have to be more careful about certain things that we buy, like if we're buying a t-shirt, what it's made from. But also earlier on you mentioned that there's always pros and cons to different materials, so I'm just wondering if there's anything we should especially avoid or things that are on the whole better.
That's interesting. Yeah, so there is certainly more I think the issue here is it's an issue of priorities and what you're more interested in. if you think it's more important, personally, to be buying local, then obviously you can be looking for where your fibres are coming from. If you've got specific countries or areas of interest that you know are engaging in specifically socially unsustainable practices, then maybe avoid fibres that are being made there or produced there. In terms of, and I will speak specifically about fibres actually, because there are great innovations that are happening across the world, and I think if you can be conscious about the brands you're picking, sometimes that's the best way to go through it. So I mentioned Behiko earlier, which is the hemp company, and they're doing fantastic work. They do lots of work with social enterprises. Actually, lots of their clothing is very affordable. They retail t-shirts, they retail all kinds of different things. And you know when you're buying with them that they have these certain measures in place. They have a very transparent policy online. So I think actually what I would recommend, rather than necessarily looking for a specific fibre or a specific fabric or a specific country, is finding brands that you feel that you can trust and interrogating their claims, seeing how transparent they are. Really, the more transparent the brand and the more that they are open about their practices, because they will have unsustainable practices and some companies within them, I suppose the more confident you can be as a consumer.
That's cool, thank you.
Any more questions? I was just wondering, first of all, how you actually got involved in sustainable fashion, like it was like before this trip or listening to what you've done to it, and also what you think is kind of being done in Scotland in particular, like what is being done that we're doing in Africa, what we need to do.
Yeah, so I've always had an interest, I suppose, in sustainability generally. In 2014, when I was in sixth form, I was the managing director of a young enterprise, social enterprise called Jump Trunk, and we imported upcycled bags and accessories from a women's cooperative in the Philippines, and there they were collecting plastic bags out of waterways and basically turning them into sort of fabric strips and then weaving them into bags. So I've always been interested in fashion sustainability in some means, and it was really great actually because we went to a social enterprise in India that was doing the same thing, so I got to see the process. And I've always just been conscious about buying second-hand things like that, but it was only when I got involved in the project, like I said, I applied in my third year, that I really started to deeply think about these issues and about the value chain as a whole, rather than just my role as a consumer and my role in the sort of fast fashion element of it, if you will. In terms of what Scotland is doing, I don't know that much, I'll be perfectly honest with you, in terms of government regulations specific to Scotland. I know in the UK, more widely, the Environmental Audit Committee, and Mary Gray, who I believe she is still currently chair of the Environmental Audit Committee, they are trying to pass through a lot in terms of, they've got a sustainable fashion action plan, and she really wants to introduce a levy on companies that's then respective to the amount of waste that they produce. But again, I think that our approach is entirely focused on the fast fashion element and the kind of post-production stage, when really what we need to be doing is more beforehand on educating consumers, on reconnecting people with these traditional processes and with these everyday processes like darning and mending, so that we know how to maintain our clothes. And I think also there needs to be so much more done in terms of changing consumer mindsets, because I think we still have a, oh, it's fine, like I will buy this one time from Topshop, or I'll buy this one time from here. I think we still kind of feed into this sustainability as a plus rather than sustainability as a necessity when it comes to buying our clothing. I think that's partly perpetuated by the media. I think it's also partly perpetuated by businesses refusing to take a cut in their profits in order to make clothes affordable to us. Because I just don't think at the moment widespread sustainability is available for regular consumers who can't afford to be paying for the high lines. That answers your question.
Just to mind the time for one last question.
I'd like to emphasise as well, I will also be around for the rest of the day, so if you have questions, come and find me, and also come to the Sustainable Fashion Workshop and we can talk about it then.
I can probably make this quick and fit in a second question, but I'm wondering if there are any potential pitfalls for new people who are trying to understand sustainable fashion, and create like false information or things out there where they don't have the bigger picture yet. And is there anything to sort of information to ward against that, or how do we know the information we're getting is like that's the one we should probably follow in case we make mistakes on the way?
I think that's a really interesting point. I don't think there's necessarily any pitfalls against, or that are prejudiced against people unless they are, like I said, buying immediately into lines like H&M consciousness being entirely sustainable. I think that is the main pitfall, that we frame this debate as sustainability as something that can be perfectly achieved when it just can't. And I think actually the way that you remedy that is by listening to and reading, if you can, all of these different perspectives. And then I suppose coming to your own conclusion after hearing all these different opinions as to what the best way for you and your responsibility and your role to move forward, but also thinking about how you criticise other actors in the chain, how you can help instigate change.
Thank you.
So then one last question.
Hi, I'm very interested in what you've had to say and opening up the perspectives. The research that I've looked at around consumer behaviour is that while 80% of people would buy a more sustainable item, only 20% of products could be classified as sustainable.